Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Investigative Journal, the greatest show on earth, the greatest story never told, and one of the most interesting shows you'll ever listen to if you take the time to get behind the scenes and see really what's going on in this world. It's not a pretty thing. Greg Anthony here. And today, I always wondered why the mainstream media or many of the alternative media do not cover the Jesuits for what they really are. And I'm just amazed how they're respected all over the place. I mean, our top political people are giving speeches at Georgetown. These priests are running around posing as saintly men when in fact they're working behind the scenes in all different kinds of ways to basically take over churches, ruin Protestantism. They're doing the same thing they did when they were formed in the 1500s by the Vatican to basically take care of anybody that didn't follow what the Pope was saying. The Protestant Reformation was a mandate that we don't need the Vatican to tell us what to do. And so Protestants were beginning to read the Bible, and this was a threat. So the Jesuits, the militia, the military arm of the Vatican was set out to destroy them one way or another by taking over their mind, body, or soul. And back then, basically, they just like to cut heads off. And today they do it more deceptively. They take away your mind. They take away anything that leaves you as a human being with the idea of searching out one of the most important stories never told. And it's really sad when you understand this story because you see all these people working in the media who are supposed to be vanguards for protecting freedom of press and etc. and do absolutely nothing about this story. And when they're confronted with it by stories on the internet, they pass it off as just conspiracy theory, nuts, calling these good priests holy men, when in fact they're nothing but scoundrels. And let me go back a ways, and then I'm going to give you two articles today to prove my point. One is quite recent, and one which took place just recently, and then another one is about 5 or 6 years old that I happen to cover in depth with a law firm out of the Northwest, out of Washington State. And if you consider this organization to be up and good, and why our politicians bow down and kiss their feet, then man, you don't listen to this show, really, because you're a hopeless case. You got to understand that this story has been kept out of the media for a reason. It's taking your country down. And I mean down. And that's what's happening right before your very eyes. You're seeing it every day. If you take the time to research behind the scenes, why do you think they're turning our justice system upside down when you listen to a broadcast about just what happened with the Mueller report? We all know what that is. And Donald Trump's supposed collusion with Russia. When you get the top prosecutor as the special counsel coming up and saying he did not exonerate him and did not either give him a thumbs up or thumbs down, you realize that this has all gone haywire. That's not the standard of justice in this country. You either have probable cause that you committed a crime or the prosecutor shuts up and goes away. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's not what they're doing. They're shoving it in your face. And that's just one example. Now, the immigration problem is another one. I mean, do you really think these borders are open for a reason to really help people coming from these foreign countries, like Guatemala, like Honduras, like El Salvador? No. The Vatican and all of their minions destroyed these countries earlier. They don't care about these people. And all they're doing now is flooding America with these people, and they're getting a raw deal coming into this country. And American people are sitting back going, well, we've got to close our borders, but they're never going to close. Congress has had 50 years to straighten this out and treat people decently on both sides of the border. They don't treat people decently in El Salvador right now. You got the CIA running around there like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to do everything possible to disrupt that country. And who do you think they take their marching orders from? Yeah, you're right. The Jesuits, who are the group that Hitler based his organization, they called Trump Hitler. Well, you know something? You might as well call the Jesuit General Hitler, or call the Pope Hitler, because he, basically the popes have supported Hitler all throughout his time. Who was Hitler's mentor? Pope Pius XII. And there's factual basis on that. And you know what? Let's just say an average person knew something about Pope Pius XII and Hitler. Well, there was a couple. He had housekeepers, right? And there are 2 or 3 housekeepers that have come out publicly in books that you'll never see anymore, because pretty soon you're not going to be able to read anything outside of what they give you. And we're going to have a bunch of morons running around this earth just listening to what the politicians and the Pope or all these people that are running around pretending they're religious or holy, trying to direct your life. All they're going to do is take away every bit of your mind, body, and soul. So anyway, a housekeeper who worked with Hitler worked with Pope Pius XII, came out and said, yeah, Hitler used to come over all the time, and they'd go to the study, and he would advise him on what to do. Then you can even go farther. Hitler was not you think he wrote Mein Kampf? If he wrote Mein Kampf, you know something? I wrote the Bible. Yes. I mean, that's about as much chance of me writing the Bible as him writing Mein Kampf. It was written by a priest called Father Stampfel, a Jesuit, when he was in prison. And if you even start looking deeper, you'll see, people don't even look, I was talking to people about China the other day. And they're all worried, China's going to take over the country, China's going to do this, China's going to do that. Well, you know what? You deserve it. Because years ago, I can remember 15 years ago, I started saying, you want to know what China's goals are? Okay, let's start out by, when did we really even know about China? Who was the first people really over there to give us an idea about China? Guess who it was? The Jesuit missions in the 1600s. They were already over there trying to wheel and deal with the emperors, trying to get on their good side. And basically, you can read stories of how they tried to do things there. Many were kicked out. And then you go to all these other countries throughout the course of history, and you do just a little bit of research, and you'll find that this benevolent organization that controls Washington, the Jesuits of Georgetown, were kicked out of over 80 countries throughout the course of their existence, and they've only been here since the 1500s. But supposedly they're good guys. Guess who Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton's mentor is? Yeah, he's a Jesuit. And trust me on this. I saw it firsthand when I was in Rome. I didn't believe it. I went there thinking I was going to become a good Catholic again. And what I found out was the biggest corrupt organization in the history of mankind. And they still are today. And to add injury to insult, one of the biggest corrupt guys was a cardinal from Chicago, where I came from. He was there, Cardinal Marchenkus. Yeah, and I've told you that story many times. So, there's a history here of not, a lot of times you read something, you go, I can't believe that. I'm not going to believe that. And I probably would have been the same thing on many stories, but by actually seeing what they were doing there and having a chance to talk to a few of these idiots, I understood this is going to be the thing that breaks the camel's back, brings America to its knees, and creates the one world order, one world government. And if you don't think it's coming, just look at what's going on in the world today. It's been this way a long time, but it's getting worse and worse. And you know what? They say it's getting better and better. Everything that they say is white is black. Everything that they say is peaceful is going to end up in war. And now we get to the specific stories I want to talk about here. And if any of you take away from this and say, I still don't believe it, then you know what? Like I said earlier, all you've become is a perfect person to be to sit there and listen to all this propaganda that you get every day. You don't want to go anywhere farther. And all you're going to do is either forget about it or watch your fellow man go down the tubes. And that's what's going to happen. Because I don't see much hope. Because there aren't many people out there. And they've got so much control over your mind, body, and soul right now. If I spent this show, I could spend 100 shows showing you what they've done to you. And they do it through deception, just the way they did it when they were formed. This organization, this criminal organization that's hiding behind the robes of Jesus Christ. And they're going to do it right to, ask, if he was alive, he'd tell you. Ask what happened to Lincoln. You ever read some of his writings about the Jesuits? And how they tried to kill him 3 or 4 times and finally did? And then the people that were involved in the hit team, it wasn't a one man in, the lone gunman theory like they always tell you. Like even they said, Kennedy was, they always use a lone gunman. And you can't believe it. So there wasn't just John Wilkes Booth who shot Lincoln. There was a whole conspiracy of men. In fact, they not only tried to get Lincoln, they tried to get the Secretary of Defense that night, the Secretary of the Treasury. They were trying to wipe out those people that were standing against popery. And boy, they were telling you back then exactly what the Pope and what the Catholic Church had in mind for this country. And Lincoln was no fan. In fact, if you go back to one of his great court cases before he became president, he actually had the Jesuits in that courtroom and the Bishop of Chicago admitting that the papal orders stated this, and he had them read this. They were here to disrupt America. They funneled money into the Civil War, into the Confederacy, and their whole idea was to take over this country slowly. And he had him on the record. And he also, it was during a criminal trial where he got a priest off on rape charges, and the Jesuits put the priest there on false charges. Lincoln got him off, and the priest said to him, "They'll never forget you." They remained friends until Lincoln was killed. And you can read a lot of these stories. You can even go to a couple people that are living today. One I can tell you, his name is C.T. Wilcox from Canada. He actually uncovered and had in his hands these documents written by this priest, which had notes and things from Lincoln, and he got them from one of the relatives that lived in Upper Canada, because he made 2 copies because they burnt his house down in Champaign and all of his records. That's the priest that Lincoln got off on rape charges. So Lincoln knows all about them. Now, smart people right now don't even give a damn about this. They don't even cover it. And, all they'll say, and you can listen to some of these smart guys, and if I had blinkers on like a horse and blinders and didn't cover this story, of course, a lot of what these people say, especially on the right, especially conservative Americans, who really want to uphold the Constitution and uphold the rights of citizens, have a lot of great things to say. And I enjoy, listening to them. And I would just, every time I hear them speak, I say, can't we just get this story in here? Boy, this will really open things up. And you want to shut the people down that are creating what Americans know is turning into a global world, where you have people on the pulpit, you have people in your Congress who care more about people from other countries than they care about you. Now listen, I like people from all over the world, but if you're a congressman elected to Ohio, the reason you're there is to protect and to help the people from Ohio first. But what you have is a bunch of globalists in this country who are lying to you every day. Because most people don't have a background to this story, so they think it's just human error. It's a person who believes strongly in his opinion. Think about this. A lot of people do a lot of things that they think are right because they think it's for the better, the higher good. But in fact, really what they're doing is destroying the country they're living in. And a lot of misguided people think that way. And they do it in so many different ways, and you just want to take them and wring their necks sometimes and say, listen, you can't subvert certain laws. And I mean, if you read the writings of that Constitution, it's great. It gives you everything you need to live a great life. But you can't do it if you got people that are subverting it because they think they're doing it for the better good of the world. And you know what? What is the Jesuit motto? The ends justify the means. And so that's why they can say, yes, we can kill a heretic, and then you can go to confession and get the sin of murder wiped off because, you know what? You were doing it to protect the better good of the papacy. Now, people in Congress think the same way about the laws of the United States. Oh, we'll run roughshod over the Fourth Amendment. We'll take down a president even though he was elected by the people of this country. Now, I know he was selected, but everybody thinks he's elected, so let's play their game here for a minute. So he wins it fair and square, and then you got people on the other side, these globalists, who are subverting the Constitution, basically saying, I want to throw this guy out of office because we don't like him. That's not the way it works. But they think they're doing the better good of mankind because they know better than you. You're just a nobody that goes to Walmart. You're just somebody that smells like a Trump voter. You're just a nobody because you don't have any money. You don't have any power. You don't have anything. You're not in the Washington elite. You're not in the Hollywood elite. So you get idiots like Robert De Niro getting on the air, bringing, it's just a first-year law student listening to that idiot talk about the law and talk about bringing 1,000 prosecutors that state that Trump committed obstruction of justice. First of all, prosecutors aren't a jury of your peers. And secondly, they don't get a chance to be the judge, jury, and executioner. No. The standards are very simple. If you don't have probable cause to prove that somebody committed obstruction of justice, you don't have it. And that's basically what happened in this case with Trump. Now go back to Nixon. There you had obstruction. You had hours of tapes where he talked about, let's do this, let's do this. You know what he tried to do. Let's subvert the laws here. Let's even steal stuff. Get documents. Hide the documents. That's obstruction. That's what you need. Then you go ahead and guess what happens? As a president, he couldn't be indicted, so you'd have to wait till he's out of office. But he resigned. So that's the process, or you can impeach him. But there was a reason to impeach him. Now, these globalists, who are run by the Jesuits of Georgetown, let's not forget them, are trying to kick out a duly elected president. Now, we're going to play the game here a minute. Elected by all of these great nationalist Americans who want to see a great country. And you know what they're doing? They're spitting in your face. Saying, no. You can have that, but you're not going to have any world that we don't think is good for you. That's what Robert De Niro's saying. I mean, here's a guy who's benefited more than 99.9% of American people, through his acting. He's had a chance to live a great life in America, but he can't stand that people in Ohio who are working on farms, people in Minnesota, people in Kansas, people in Oklahoma, or as Alec Baldwin says, well, it's only these flyover Americans that vote for Trump. Yeah, demeaning good people in America because they know how to live. They know what's good for you. You don't know what's good for you. So you can't have Trump in there. Now, whether you like Donald Trump or not, and whether, I know he was selected, I'm looking at it from a broader picture of what these jackasses are doing to you. Because there are a lot of good Americans who want to live a decent life want to have a great family, but feel they don't have anywhere to go anymore. The laws, you know something? I was thinking about this today. I was listening to what's going on in Washington, and I was really thinking about this. I said, I don't want to be accused of a crime in this country now. These guys can do whatever they want to you and get away with it. Look what they do. I've seen it happen. You don't have to go any farther than the guy that was the pit bull for Robert Mueller, a guy by the name of Andrew Weissman, a scoundrel prosecutor. Remember the Arthur Anderson case, where the Supreme Court overturned that prosecution and conviction 9-0? After they had destroyed thousands and thousands of jobs, they got rid of Arthur Anderson, they got rid of his firm, but he was not guilty from the beginning because they manufactured a crime. And that's exactly what they're doing here, and they're manufacturing crimes against the people who believe they've elected a president that's going to look out for the interests of America. And so how can you justify this? You can't. And you go, where do these people come from? And so I listen to CNN, who's turned into nothing but a socialist Jesuit propaganda arm. You can't hardly listen to them anymore because most of what they say is not based on fact and is not based on either, when we're talking about what's going on in Washington, the letter of the law. But now turn aside, I can't listen to them anymore. But there are so many people that do because they don't care about that anymore. They're mesmerized by Hollywood, mesmerized by Bob De Niro. Just because Bob De Niro's a good actor doesn't mean he knows shit about what he's talking about, and he doesn't. In fact, he's making a real ass of himself as far as I'm concerned. And there are many more just like him. Now, secondly, turn over and listen to the right wing. You know, I can deal with them. And although I know there's more behind the scenes and perhaps they're covering too for something, I can't tell whether a guy like Mark Levin or Hannity, I can't categorically say they know this story. They know that the Jesuits are playing the puppet masters, and we have basically the left and the right working together, playing this game to get the synthesis they want. And that's not going to be a nationalist America. I don't know if these guys know that, but when you listen to some of the things they say, you can agree with them. I can agree with Mark Levin on most everything he says regarding the Mueller investigation, regarding his ideas of the Constitution, and many, many things. My only hope is, I said, what about this other story here, Mark? And I'm not criticizing you for that. I'm saying, man, do you know about it? Can we talk about it? It has a lot to do with what's happening in the world. And you know what? It isn't hate speech. And you know that as well as I do. Because you talk against what they consider hate speech on the right every day. And this, I think, falls in the same category. So when I think about all these things, I start thinking, wow, I got to tell people and show them examples. And then say, listen, look at more things. And when you start adding all these things up, I come to the conclusion that it's called the Vatican-led New World Order. And I put those words in Vatican-led Jesuit New World Order for a good reason. One, they're involved in this behind the scenes, duplicitly and deceptively trying to destroy this country. And somebody's got to put a stop to it, or at least get the story out there. But you know, you can't even get this in a debate anymore. So is there freedom of speech? No. Is there freedom of press? No. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and I promised that I'd get into a couple stories regarding the Jesuits and some of their nefarious activities. Now, what we talked about in the first half hour is important, and what I'm getting at is all these people, like I was saying, even in the right-wing broadcasters, okay, they're saying there's no freedom of speech anymore, the Constitution is being torn apart, and look at what the Democrats are doing now. So it's this constant fight, and a lot of what they say has a lot of merit, because on one hand you're getting the globalists basically saying there is no rule of law, and they're shoving it in the face of Americans, saying, you know what, no matter what you do, we're going to tell you how to live. And so a lot of what the right wing is saying is true. And so you can't help, even if you spent 1 year in law school, but agree with people like Mark Levin and Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson, some of these people, and Laura Ingram's another. You got to agree with them. And you look at it and go, but listen, if there is no freedom of speech anymore, then how come this story is never told? How come we have to consider the Vatican and the Jesuits this revered organization that's never done anything to hurt anybody in their entire existence? And they know they'll go back and give you ideas of the Inquisition and things like this, but that's not really what's going on. And they know it because they still will not allow even the good Americans, the nationalist Americans on the media. This story is not going to be allowed on the air because they'll call it hate speech. And I say, well, you're being a bit hypocritical, calling everything that this PC culture and all the things that the globalists are doing, and claiming that if you say anything bad about a Muslim, it's hate speech. Well, it's the same thing if you say anything bad about Georgetown or about the Jesuits. They hide it. they don't cover this story. I don't remember seeing these stories in the news, and I worked on one of them, and I'm going to tell you why. And I've worked on several that are major news stories that never get covered. So it tells me there's a cover-up. Right. I mean, if you got freedom of press, it's got to go all the way. You can't just selectively say, well, we're going to cover the American Revolution based on, historical records that we know have been doctored. It's not good enough to go deeper and give another side of the story. That might not work. And we better not, talk about what the Vatican's really about and what they're about today and what goes on there really. Because, something, I don't think people can handle it. Oh, no, they can't. We've got to keep our institutions solid. It's not. And we know that any organization that's involved in this stuff has a background that needs to be checked out thoroughly. And another thing that really upsets me is a lot of these globalists, many of their mentors actually are the people from Georgetown University. And somebody tell me why the Patriot Act, we know what that was written prior to 9/11, and who wrote the Patriot Act? Who was instrumental in preparing it? It was a lawyer from Jesuit-Georgetown. I think it was a Vietnamese lawyer named Vinh Dinh. And so we have a lot of questions, but these will never get answered. And my thinking is this. If these questions don't get answered, we're not going to solve anything, whether you join the globalists or whether you join the American nationalists. And those on the side of sovereignty and borders and, freedom of speech and all, that's not going to happen. Because there's something else going on behind the scenes. And I read that to you yesterday, that little comment from a person by the name of Manly P. Hall, a Masonic writer who's revered in the world of Masonry, and the Jesuit Masonry as I call it. And he basically said that there was an august body who had an interest in creating this country for a different reason than the history books tell you. A reason only known by who? The selected elite. The chosen few. And I think it's the media, whether it's left or right, are protecting the chosen few. And my question only happens to be, which ones are they? Who are the chosen few? And can the chosen few come from both the globalist side and from the side of the right-wing nationalist Americans? Can it? Yes. Because it's very obvious. Now listen, where do they get this idea of the Hegelian dialectic? Where do you get it? Well, do you know that the Jesuits are masters at taking, you might have one Jesuit who's a Donald Trump supporter and another who is a globalist. And they fight back and forth. But their main goal is what? The papacy is the one world order, the one world globalist government they're going to create through this friction. So they play both sides of the coin. They've done it for years. In every possible area you can think of. Even go back to the theory of the Antichrist. Okay? A popular subject amongst many Christians. Now, the Jesuits were always the leaders of this theory to get the masses to believe in many different things. And they were quite confusing if you look at their history. Because back around the time of the Protestant Reformation, and even in a Bible that was written, the Bible prior to the King James, written in Switzerland, what was the, you know the one I'm talking about, all you Bible buffs out there. But anyway, it's the Bible that contains footnotes, and they took those footnotes out in the King James Bible. And in those footnotes, you'll see that many times the papacy was referred to as the Antichrist, or the Antichrist system. And the Protestants back then knew that the papacy was the Antichrist system. And that's what they were protesting. But how many Protestants today, you can go to the 100 Protestant churches, and you won't find a one of them that'll say what the Protestant reformers were saying. So this idea of the Antichrist was a thorn in the side of the Jesuits back then and the Vatican, because they had many people reading the Bible, pinpointing Bible verses that pointed out that Vatican and the Vatican system was the Antichrist system. Well, they had to change that. So who did that best? The great educators, the great Jesuits, and they came up with two theories. One was the preterist theory, and that was that the Antichrist has already come. Okay, it's not the papacy. The Antichrist has already come. Okay, and they pointed out who it was, and I forget, but they said it's already in the past. It's not the papacy. But then there was another Jesuit who said, no, the Antichrist is coming in the future. He hasn't come yet. And so now people say, well, Hitler's the Antichrist. Trump is the Antichrist. Oh, my mother-in-law is the Antichrist. And so you had two Jesuits taking two different views to basically confuse the hell out of you and to get the heat off the Vatican is basically what they did. And if you didn't believe them back then, they killed you. Okay? That's simple. Now they just kill you slowly. They do it through all of their different nefarious tactics. We're going to talk about a couple of those in the last 10 minutes. All right, quickly. If you go back to some of my stories, you're gonna know that I talk a lot about 1600s in Paraguay and how the Jesuits perfected socialism, communism. And so where do you think our politicians learned it from? Where do you think socialism came from? And who do you think's driving Ocasio-Cortez now? Same people that created socialism back in the 1600s in Paraguay. And during that time, I started looking at a lot of the Jesuit connections to the slave trade and the West India Company, East India Company. And boy, that's an interesting story. And then recently, a story came out that the Jesuits, had to apologize. Georgetown apologized for owning slaves, 272 slaves, and they had bills of sale for these slaves. And the articles of this agreement between Thomas F. Mulledy of Georgetown, District of Columbia, of one part, and Jesse Beatty and Henry Johnson of the state of Louisiana, two surviving, their relatives were slaves, have proven the Jesuits back in 1838 in this country were selling slaves, and they have the bills of sale to prove it. And we got that whole story. So go look it up, and you'll find some really good reading regarding what they did in the slave trade here in America. So just think about this. How can you think that this organization is on the up and up and should not be considered part of the problem in Washington, in the world? You can't. But it's covered up by both the left and right wing because they know who their boss is. Otherwise, this story should be out there. Where is the freedom of the press? It doesn't exist for this story, and I don't see anybody coming to the rescue of people who know this, people who've been tortured by these people, killed by them. They don't even cover the story. And I'll get into this slave story on Monday because it's really interesting. Because those 272 slaves that the Georgetown University Jesuits had bills of sale for and recently apologized are the tip of the iceberg, or what they really were involved in. And I think the American people need to know that. But apparently, our good friends on the left and the right wing don't think. They know better. They know better for you and I, don't they? They're going to tell us what we should read, shouldn't read, how we should think of the Vatican, how we should think of the Jesuits, because it's for the better cause, right? So Mark Levin, when you say that, and when even the Attorney General makes that statement about, some people do things for the better cause when they're really destroying America, think about it when you think about this story. And you may be covering up this story. All right, what about the largest sex abuse settlement in history in the United States. Does anybody know what it is? Not if you read the newspapers. Not if you listen to Fox News or CNN. You wouldn't know. I know. In fact, I was there on this story even before they got the settlement. And I worked hand in glove on radio shows, countless hours with a man by the name of Ken Bear Chief. He was an investigator for the Tamaki law firm. And what was he investigating? Jesuit missionary schools set up in America to supposedly educate Native American children. The reason Washington and the government can't take a pass on this is because they were being subsidized, and the authority came from the United States government for the Jesuit schools to initiate this practice of opening up these mission schools, taking children from Native Americans there, and their story is they were educating them in English, taking care of them, but a whole different story occurred. And not only did they do this with the aid and the abetting of the American government, they did it in Canada with the Canadian government, the mission schools there, and the same stories are there. How many times have we covered? Hundreds of people that were either killed or abused in these schools. And I will tell you, you can't ever get that out of your mind when you get a guy coming on the show, and his job was to carry barrelfuls of babies into what they called the pigsty and bury them. That was in an adjoining story that the Vatican and the Jesuits were involved in, and that was called the Duplessis orphan story. Go look at that one. But let's center on the Tamaki law firm and all of you people out there in the news media who are sitting there covering every minute of every day about what the hell Trump does, or that you cover when he goes to the bathroom, how he wipes his ass, everything. But you don't even cover this story, and this one is important. It shows you how the American government and the Jesuits from, 1940s through the 90s, were still abusing these kids. They weren't educating them. And if you look at the horrors that went on in these schools even before the 40s, because this started in the 1800s, and how many of these kids were wiped out, stolen, taken from these Native Americans and never got out of there, beaten sometimes to death. This is a organization that sits next to Washington, D.C., and dictates your foreign and domestic policy, and they're good guys. Why do you think the journalists don't cover it? If anybody on any of those news stations ever said one word like this, they'd be out in the cold the next day. They'd lose their $1 million a year job. But ask Clarita Vargas, who was victimized as a child at St. Mary's Mission School, and ask her about her experience at a Friday news conference when she gave this story about the $166.1 million. This settlement came out in 2011 that the Jesuits paid for what they did at this one school in the north and these two schools in the Northwest. Oh, they have to sign an agreement where they're not going to talk about, but they talked. Some of the people talked. And I remember when we were when Ken Bear Chief would come on my show researching this story, and he was going from school to school, from reservation to reservation, getting witnesses, getting people who want to finally go on the record. We had one person on the record stated that she witnessed a baby being born under the altar at a Catholic church on one of these reservations. And she was a child and too afraid to say anything, but as she grew up, she wanted to tell somebody. The police never would even investigate. Now you think there's cover-ups. This is huge. A group of Northwest priests who sexually abused hundreds, and these are Jesuit priests, of children in the 40s through the 90s, have agreed to pay, and this is in 2011, $166 million say the attorneys, and I know the attorneys involved from the Tamaki law firm, this huge payment by the Northwest Jesuits marks the largest settlement between a religious order. Why call them a religious order? They're anything but. They're an abusive, child abusive criminal order. And they abuse these victims. It's the largest in the history of the United States. The abuse primarily took place in Jesuit-operated mission schools and boarding schools on Indian reservations in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. Many of the victims are now in their 50s and 60s, but still have not forgotten the fear and torment they suffered at the hands of Jesuit priests who abused them sexually and psychologically. Many of those children were brought to the missions after they were abandoned by their parents. This is not a group of two bad apples in a bunch. This is not a group of 2 or 3 priests. This is an organization that supports this, and they are in Washington, D.C. right now telling your politicians what to do and telling your journalists you can't cover this story. So is there freedom in this country? Absolutely not. Many of these victims, in their 50s, Catherine Mendez, 53, who was abused as a child at St. Mary's Mission boarding school in Omak, said she felt a feeling of relief when she learned of the settlement. Mendez, a Yakima tribal member, was 11 when she was sent to St. Mary's by a state foster worker. So we got the state working with the Catholic Jesuits. And she was abused when she was 12 years old. Multiple law firms were involved in bringing this settlement on behalf of 500 victims. Many of these victims, my friends, were found by a guy by the name of Ken Bear Chief, who came on my show years ago, before this 2011, when we were trying to get this story out. And do you think anybody would cover it? No. Including the Tamaki law firm, okay, which represents many of the victims who were abused in Washington State, Idaho, and Montana. Now, there's another firm named Manley and Stewart who handle about 200 cases from Alaska. The settlement recognizes that the Jesuits betrayed the trust of hundreds of young children in their care and inflicted terrible atrocities upon them. This is not just, fondling a child. This is basically torture and murder. And there were some murders in this whole story. Says attorney Blaine Tamaki, these religious figures should have been responsible for protecting these children, but instead raped and molested them. 38 of the claims handled by Tamaki involve sexual abuse by Father John Morse, a Jesuit priest who now resides, guess what, in a private facility run by what? This was his punishment. He's in a retirement home. Guess who operates it? Gonzaga University, a Jesuit university, and financed by the Jesuits. So this guy abuses 37 children. He doesn't go to jail. He doesn't get a criminal charge. He gets sent to a retirement facility run by Gonzaga and financed by the Jesuits. And you don't think these guys are a bunch of criminals? Man, people, get with it. And I mean get with it quick. Father Moore stated, abusing me almost immediately. Now, this is Mendez talking. When I arrived at St. Mary's Mission, I kept the sexual molestation hidden in the dark, in my soul for years and years. Finally, when I came forward and saw that others did too, it was as if the blanket that had hidden our secret was pulled off and we could move into the light again. Other victims were ages 9 to 14. I'll go on. Let's come back Monday. We'll get into a little bit more in depth. But I think, these two stories are not an aberration, are not just an example of two bad apples in the barrel. This is systemic, epidemic that's been going on since the Jesuits were involved in the formation of this country. And that secret august body, those initiated few, you can bet many of them came from this organization and are still deceptively running the same type of operation that they did when they first started persecuting Christians during the Protestant Reformation. This hasn't ended. But you would think it's ended. You don't even get this story should be on the news. Why wasn't it covered? It was on page 39 of the Washington Post, probably on page 57 of the New York Times, and maybe gave a one-sentence story, one-sentence cover in some of these mainstream publications. But this is major. And when you talk to Ken Bearchief like I did, and some of the horror stories, you wonder why I get angry sometimes. And you wonder why I say to these people, you're hypocrites. And you wonder why there is no freedom in this country anymore, and you're losing it daily. You don't have to look any farther than Georgetown. And I wonder just how big this is, how the left wing and the right wing, how much they're working together, and how many of these people really know it. Does Newt Gingrich know it? His wife is the ambassador to the Vatican. She must know something. Have her comment on these stories. And then go say a daily prayer on Sunday with the Lucifer Pope. Have fun. Yeah. It's a real good time in America, isn't it? Have a good weekend despite all this. See you Monday on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.